Before we dive into the ledger, I want you to look at something. There's a small blackened circular mark on my kitchen's white laminate counter. It's about the size of a dime. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, pointed it out to my son with a trembling lip, claiming I'd left a hot burner on and nearly incinerated the family legacy. Here's the thing. I didn't make that mark. I know this because for 30 years I worked as a lead forensic auditor for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I don't just notice details, I document them. That mark wasn't there at 0800 when I made my tea. It appeared at 10:15, exactly 3 minutes after Vanessa popped in to check on me. She used a high-heat butane torch, the kind you use for creme brulee, to create a physical manifestation of my mental decline. She thought she was gaslighting a confused old man. She didn't realize she was leaving forensic evidence for a man who has sent billionaires to prison for smaller discrepancies than a burnt countertop. Keep listening. Welcome back to Payback Logs. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I have lived in this house since 1985. Every creak in the floorboards is a familiar note in a song I've been listening to for decades. My routine is my anchor. I wake up at 600, I have 1 cup of Earl Grey, and I read the financial journals until 800. I am a man of precision. You have to be when your job involves finding the 1 cent that doesn't belong in a $10 million shell company. I was sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. My granddaughter, Lily, was across from me. She's 6, with eyes like her grandmother's and a mind that craves order. We were doing our ritual, the great penny count. We empty her ceramic piggy bank and sort the coins by year. It's a lesson in history, math, and the value of small things. "Grandpa, why is this one so shiny?" Lily asked, holding up a 2024 penny. "Because it hasn't been through as many hands yet, Lily," I said. The more hands a coin passes through, the more stories it picks up, and the more dirt it gathers. I checked my Casio, 10:15 a.m., exactly on time for the Sunday check-in. The front door opened, and the smell of expensive, aggressive perfume filled the hallway before Vanessa did. My daughter-in-law is a woman who treats life like a hostile takeover. She was accompanied by a man in a beige suit that cost more than my first car. He had a smile that was too wide and eyes that never quite reached it. "Ray, you're still at it with the pennies?" Vanessa said, her voice dripping with a sugary, patronizing tone. She didn't look at me, she looked at the counter. "Oh goodness, Arthur, look at this, another one." She pointed to the burn mark near the stove. I looked at it. It was fresh. I could still smell the faint chemical tang of butane, not the smoky scent of a forgotten pot. "I don't recall using that burner today, Vanessa," I said. My voice was level, the tone I used when a defendant claimed they'd lost their receipts in a fire. "That's exactly the problem, Ray," she said, turning to the man in beige. "Arthur, this is Mr. Henderson from Golden Meadows. He's the lead concierge. We've been talking, and we really think it's time we discuss a more supervised environment for your safety and for Lily's." Lily looked up, her small face clouding with confusion. "Is Grandpa going away?" "Of course not, sweetie," Vanessa said, though she still didn't look at the child. "Grandpa is just going to a place where he can have a permanent vacation. No more worrying about the stove or the bills." Mr. Henderson stepped forward, smelling of peppermint and bleach. "We have a lovely suite available, Mr. Thorne. High-definition monitoring, 24-hour medical staff, and we handle all your financial disbursements so you don't lift a finger. It's about total peace of mind." I looked at Vanessa. I saw the way her eyes darted to the mahogany desk in the corner, the one where I keep my private ledgers. I knew the gold bracelet on her wrist, a Tiffany piece, I knew she couldn't afford on my son's salary as a middle manager. "I'm 72, Vanessa, not dead." "Ray, be reasonable," she said, her voice sharpening. "Last week you forgot where you put your keys. Yesterday you forgot our lunch date. And now this fire hazard? Arthur and I are your fiduciaries. We have a responsibility to protect you from yourself." She was laying the groundwork. In the IRS, we call this the narrative build. You create a series of small documented failures to justify a large-scale intervention. She wasn't just worried about my health, she was building a case for legal incapacity. A quiet dread settled in my chest. It wasn't because I believed her, it was because I realized that the person I had welcomed into my family was currently treating me like a high-yield asset to be liquidated. "I'll take the brochure, Mr. Henderson," I reached out. My hand was steady, but I let a slight, deliberate tremor enter my fingers as I took the paper. Vanessa's eyes lit up. She saw the tremor and saw a win. She didn't realize in my line of work, we call that a feint. I wanted to see how far she would go if she thought I was truly failing. "Good man, Ray," Mr. Henderson said, patting my shoulder. His hand felt like a cold fish. "I'll have the asset transfer paperwork drafted for Vanessa to review. We like to get the financial clutter out of the way early so you can focus on your transition." They left as quickly as they'd arrived. The house felt colder once the perfume and the bleach smell faded. Lily was still staring at the pennies. "Grandpa, are you broken?" I picked up the 2024 penny and handed it to her. "No, Lily, I'm just being audited, and usually when someone starts an audit, they're the ones who end up paying." I checked my Casio, 10:45 a.m. I went to the mahogany desk and opened the bottom drawer. I didn't reach for my blood pressure medication. I reached for an encrypted hard drive I hadn't touched in 3 years. The dread was still there, but it was being joined by a familiar, lethal clarity. Vanessa thought she was retiring a confused old man. She didn't realize she was attempting to embezzle from a man who had spent 30 years hunting exactly like her. She had made the first crack. Now, I was going to see what was hiding behind the wall. I closed the folder. I made coffee. I waited. The next 3 weeks were a psychological siege. Vanessa didn't just visit, she monitored. She began a campaign of subtle, high-frequency gaslighting that would have broken a lesser man. It was surgical. I'd wake up and find my car keys in the freezer. I'd go to make my morning tea and find the kettle bone dry on a screaming hot burner I knew I hadn't turned on. On Tuesday, I found my wallet tucked inside a shoe in the back of the closet. "Ray, you're doing it again," Vanessa would say, her voice a practiced mixture of pity and exasperation. She'd hold up the keys or the wallet like she was showing a toddler a broken toy. "I found these in the ice tray. Do you remember putting them there?" "I don't, Vanessa," I'd say. And for the first time in my life, I felt the cold finger of genuine doubt trace its way down my spine. Was it possible? I'd spent 30 years staring at spreadsheets, tracking the wash trades of Russian oligarchs and the smurfing techniques of cartels. The human brain is just a biocomputer. Maybe my hard drive was finally fragmenting. I'd look at my Casio, 1400, and realize I couldn't remember what I'd had for lunch. I sat in my armchair by the window, watching the rain blur the edges of the garden. The house felt heavy. The familiar creaks of the floorboards began to sound like warnings. I started to wonder if Golden Meadows was actually the peace of mind I needed. Maybe I was a fire hazard. Maybe I was a danger to Lily. I saw Vanessa in the kitchen, crying on the phone to my son, Arthur. She didn't know I could hear her through the vent. "Arthur, he's fading so fast," she sobbed. It was a beautiful performance. "I found him wandering in the backyard in his slippers this morning. He didn't know where he was. I'm so scared he's going to hurt himself. We have to move him, for his own dignity." I hadn't been in the backyard. I had been in the bathroom shaving. But her voice was so convincing, so filled with grief, that I actually checked my slippers for grass stains. I felt a wave of crushing guilt. I was becoming a burden to my son. I was a problem to be solved. I looked at the $5 million portfolio I'd built through decades of disciplined saving and smart, boring investments, the money that was supposed to be Lily's legacy, and I felt like it was nothing but a lead weight dragging our family down. "Maybe you're right, Vanessa," I said that evening, my voice sounding older, thinner. Maybe it's time to look at the paperwork for the meadows. The flash of pure, unadulterated greed that crossed her face was gone in a millisecond, replaced by a mask of relief. "Oh, Ray, you're so brave. It's the right thing to do. I'll have the total asset management forms brought over tomorrow. It'll make the transition so much smoother if I can handle the liquidation for you." I went to bed early that night, the doubt sitting in my stomach like a stone. I lay in the dark, listening to the rain, wondering when the fog had rolled in so thick that I couldn't see my own hands. But then I heard a sound, a very specific sound. It was the faint click-clack of a laptop keyboard coming from the guest room where Vanessa was staying to keep an eye on me. In my 30 years at the IRS, I've learned that every criminal has a tell. For some, it's a nervous twitch. For others, it's an obsession with details. For Vanessa, it was her rhythm. She wasn't browsing, she was data entering. The cadence was rapid, repetitive, the sound of someone moving numbers between accounts. I sat up in bed. My mind, which I had been told was fading, suddenly snapped into a familiar, high-resolution focus. I looked at the digital clock. 02:15. If I was truly losing my mind, why was my daughter-in-law performing high-speed accounting in the middle of the night? I waited until the keyboard went silent. I waited until I heard her snoring. Then I stood up. I didn't use my cane. I walked to my mahogany desk, my movements silent and precise. I didn't look for my keys. I didn't look for my wallet. I looked for the truth. I pulled out a small handheld ultraviolet light, a tool I'd used to check for forged signatures on corporate bonds. I swept it over the kitchen counter near the stove. Under the UV light, the oxidizing burn mark glowed with a specific chemical residue. It wasn't carbon from wood or laminate. It was a chemical accelerant. I swept the light over the freezer handle. There were no fingerprints of mine, only a set of small, slim prints that matched the ones on Vanessa's wine glass. The doubt didn't just evaporate, it was incinerated. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being constructed. Vanessa wasn't my fiduciary, she was my adversary, and she had forgotten the most important rule of the game. Never try to outcalculate the man who wrote the audit manual. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. I went back to my room, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the red numbers on my Casio. The fog was gone. The audit had begun.
The house was finally quiet. The only sound, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Vanessa was asleep, likely dreaming of offshore balances and linen service nursing homes. I sat at my desk, the moonlight silvering the edges of a hidden compartment I hadn't opened in years. I reached back and pressed the hidden catch. A heavy black leather binder slid out. This wasn't a forensic audit. It was a memorial. Inside were the medical records, the receipts, and the handwritten ledgers of my late wife's final year. Sarah. She had been the one who taught me that numbers aren't just cold data, they're a pulse. When she got sick, the insurance companies tried to algorithm her out of coverage. They used the same cold clinical language Vanessa was using now: cost-benefit analysis, terminal efficiency, quality of life. I spent every night for a year auditing our lives to keep her home. I remember sitting at this very desk, Sarah's hand, thin as parchment but still steady, resting on mine as I went through our joint tax returns. She would point to the neat, precise columns she'd kept for decades and whisper, "The numbers don't have a soul, Ray, but they tell the truth about ours. Don't let them tell a lie about us." She had died in this house, in our bed, with the window open so she could hear the birds. That was the dignity I had promised her. And now Vanessa was trying to use the very wealth I'd managed to save for our family as a weapon to strip that same dignity away from me. I pulled out one of Sarah's old notebooks.
On the first page, she had written our net worth in her graceful, looping cursive. She had circled the total and written, "For Lily's tomorrow." The memory of Sarah's integrity pushed back against the manufactured fog Vanessa was trying to roll in. I looked at the burn on the counter, then back to Sarah's ledger. The contrast was absolute. Sarah built, Vanessa consumed. Sarah documented truth, Vanessa forged symptoms. A wave of shame washed over me, not for being old, but for almost letting Sarah down. I had almost allowed a wash trade of my own life. I had almost allowed a predator to convince me that my legacy was a liability. "Not today, Sarah," I whispered into the quiet room, "and not to her." I felt the last of the doubt dissolve. The phantom tremors in my hands vanished, replaced by the steady, clinical calm of a man who has spent a career looking for the smurfs in the system. Vanessa thought she was dealing with a fading relic. She didn't realize she was dealing with a man who is now fueled by the strongest motivation a human can have, the protection of a promise made to the dead. I reached for my laptop. I didn't open the retirement brochures. I opened the backdoor portal to my private server. The ghost of the past wasn't there to haunt me. She was there to hand me the scalpel. At 9 a.m., Vanessa left for Pilates and brunch with her social circle, women who wore yoga pants as a uniform for spending money they didn't earn. She kissed me on the forehead, that wet, patronizing peck, and told me to stay settled while the cleaning crew arrived. As soon as her Mercedes cleared the driveway, I went to my workstation. I didn't use the family computer. I used my old government-issued ThinkPad, the one with the physical kill switch for the Wi-Fi and the encrypted BIOS. I didn't start with my bank statements. That's where amateurs look. I started with a Form 4506C, a request for a transcript of my own tax returns. I wanted to see what the IRS thought I was doing. What I found was a masterpiece of financial malice. Vanessa hadn't just been helping with the bills. She had gained access to my primary brokerage account 3 months ago. Since then, she had been running a classic wash trade scheme. She was selling my high-performing blue-chip stocks at a loss to a dummy LLC she had set up called V Horizon Management, then immediately buying them back at a slightly higher price using a second shell company. To the casual observer, it looked like my portfolio was just taking a hit due to market volatility. In reality, she was siphoning off the spread, the difference between the sale and the buyback, and funneling it through a series of smurfing transactions, deposits under $10,000 to avoid bank reporting, into an offshore account in Grand Cayman. I tracked the IP addresses. They all originated from the guest room upstairs. But the most devastating blow was the Schedule B deviations. She was intercepting my dividend checks, forging my signature, and reinvesting them into a high-interest private annuity that named her as the sole beneficiary in the event of my permanent institutionalization. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was literally financing my imprisonment at Golden Meadows using my own dividends. I sat back, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. My heart wasn't racing, it was beating with the slow, heavy thud of a predator who has finally caught the scent. Vanessa was using the exact techniques I had spent 20 years prosecuting. She was using layering to hide the source of the funds and integration to make the stolen money look like legitimate consulting fees for her shell company. She thought she was being sophisticated. She didn't realize that, to me, her complex scheme looked like a child's drawing. I ran a final check on her personal credit cards. She was maxed out. She owed $300,000 to various luxury boutiques and a lifestyle coach in Malibu. She was drowning, and she had decided to use my life as her life raft. I didn't stop at the money. I looked at the Golden Meadows contract she left accidentally on the kitchen table. I looked at the signature line for the administrator, Marcus Henderson. I cross-referenced Henderson's name with the V Horizon Management, LLC. Bingo. Henderson was a silent partner in Vanessa's shell company. The concierge was getting a 10% kickback for every high-net-worth individual he helped Vanessa retire. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was a RICO-level conspiracy to defraud the elderly. I felt a cold, surgical clarity. Vanessa had spent months trying to convince me I was losing my mind. She had tried to make me doubt my own eyes, my own memories, and my own worth. She forgot that I don't need my memory to find her. I have the paper trail. And in the world of forensic auditing, the paper trail is the only thing that never forgets. I began to compile the evidence binder. I didn't print it here. I sent it to a secure remote printer at the CID field office in the city. I checked my Casio, 11:45 a.m. Vanessa would be home in an hour, smelling of kale and entitlement.
The professional coldness of a lead auditor is a necessary shield. It allows you to look at a person's total financial ruin and see only a set of unbalanced columns. But that shield has one structural weakness, and her name is Lily. I found the motive for Vanessa's accelerated timeline at 2:30 p.m. I was looking through the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, UTMA account I had set up for Lily the day she was born. It was a $250,000 set-it-and-forget-it fund, intended to ensure she'd never have to worry about a tuition bill or a down payment. The balance was $14.12. I felt a coldness in my marrow that no winter could match. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my portfolio, she had cannibalized her own daughter's future. She had liquidated the account 6 months ago using a forged signature and a hardship withdrawal clause. But where did the money go? I traced the wire. It didn't go to her offshore account. It went directly to the personal holding company of Marcus Henderson, the concierge at Golden Meadows. It was a prepayment. Vanessa was literally paying for my care at a luxury warehouse for the elderly using the money meant to educate her child. It was a kickback to ensure a suite was open and that Henderson would vouch for my incompetence. I walked out to the backyard, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. Lily was sitting in the grass, her green plastic piggy bank in her lap. She wasn't counting pennies today. She was crying, quiet sobs that shook her small shoulders. "Lily, what's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling beside her. My knees cracked, but I didn't feel the pain. "Mommy said we have to sell my big girl's school," she whispered, her face red and tear-streaked. "She said Grandpa's too expensive to keep at home because his brain is broken. She said if I don't give her my pennies, the Meadows man won't take care of you." I pulled her into a hug, the fury inside me turning into something sharp and lethal. Vanessa wasn't just gaslighting me, she was weaponizing my existence against my granddaughter. She was making Lily feel responsible for my decline, turning her love for me into a source of guilt and fear. In the IRS, we have a term for this, a predicate act. It's the initial crime that triggers a wider investigation. Stealing my money was a civil matter. Liquidating a child's trust and using it to bribe a healthcare administrator while psychologically abusing a minor is a federal criminal referral. "Lily, look at me," I said, tilting her chin up. "My brain isn't broken, and your pennies are staying right where they are. Do you remember what I told you about the shiny new penny?" She nodded, sniffing. "It hasn't been through as many hands yet." "That's right, and some hands are dirty, Lily, but Grandpa spent his whole life cleaning up dirty hands. I'm going to make sure your school is right where I put it, I promise." I walked back into the house, past Vanessa, who was sitting on the sofa scrolling through a luxury real estate app. She didn't even look up. To her, Lily and I were just 2 more data points in an equation she'd already solved.
"Ray, you look pale," she said, her voice dripping with that artificial concern. "Maybe you should go lay down before Arthur gets here with the final paperwork." "I'm not tired, Vanessa," I said. My voice was as steady as a bank vault. "I've never been more awake." I went into my study and locked the door. I didn't reach for my blood pressure meds. I reached for the phone. I called Special Agent Sarah Jenkins at CID. She had been my protege for 10 years before I retired. She was the one who taught me that sometimes you have to let the target think they've won so they'll walk right into the light. "Sarah, it's Ray Thorne. I have a 1040X on a family matter. I need a suspicious activity report filed through FinCEN on a Marcus Henderson and a V Horizon Management." "Ray? It's been years. What's going on?" "I'm running a dead man's switch audit on my own life, Sarah," I said, watching the rain hit the window. "I have a $5 million portfolio being washed through the Caymans and a UNTMA trust being used for a RICO kickback. I need a federal prosecutor who likes easy wins." "Consider it done. What's your play?" "I'm hosting a celebratory dinner on Friday. I want the IRS to cater. And Sarah, bring the handcuffs, the ones with the heavy gauge." I hung up. I looked at the burn on the counter through the open door. Vanessa thought she was the one with the butane torch. She didn't realize that I was the one who had spent 30 years studying how to turn a single spark into a 5-alarm federal fire. Motivation had shifted. This wasn't about my retirement anymore. This was about a child's future and a man's promise to his late wife. Vanessa had tried to use Lily's heart as a lever. She was about to find out what happens when that lever snaps. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. Thank you, for real.
The trap I built for Vanessa was a masterclass in forensic entrapment. In the CID, we don't just catch people in the middle of a crime, we create an environment where their own greed becomes a physical weight they can't drop. Vanessa was so blinded by the shimmer of the $5 million finish line that she never noticed the floor beneath her was actually a scale. I constructed a 4-layer trap designed to snap shut with the force of a bank vault. Layer 1. The total asset transfer bait. I told Vanessa I was feeling overwhelmed and ready to sign the papers for Golden Meadows. I explicitly asked her to prepare a final asset transfer document that would consolidate my $5 million portfolio into a single management account. This was the bait. By creating this document, I was forcing her to put the entire scope of her embezzlement into one neat, legally binding package. I was giving her the pen to write her own indictment. Layer 2. The dead man's switch. While I played the confused old man, I used my old workstation to set up a digital dead man's switch on my accounts. I linked my brokerage to an automated IRS flag and freeze protocol. The moment a transfer exceeding $10,000 to a non-domestic or non-vetted shell company, it wouldn't just stop the money, it would trigger an immediate FinCEN suspicious activity report and alert the Treasury Department's cybercrime unit. I was turning my wealth into a landmine. Layer 3. The bribe trail. I accidentally left a note on the kitchen counter for Vanessa, suggesting I was worried about the Meadows fees and was considering calling my own auditor to review the UTMA accounts. This was a pressure tactic. I knew it would make her panic. I knew she would go to Marcus Henderson to speed up the process. I had already arranged with Sarah Jenkins at CID to have Henderson's phone tapped. Within 4 hours, we had a recording of Vanessa and Henderson discussing the prepayment she'd made with Lily's college fund. Layer 4. The celebratory dinner. I invited Vanessa and Henderson to a farewell to the house dinner. I told them I wanted to sign the final papers in front of witnesses to ensure everything was above board.
I even encouraged Vanessa to bring her concierge so he could see the legacy he was inheriting. I spent the morning of the dinner polishing the silver. I looked at the burn on the counter one last time. Vanessa thought she was the one with the torch. She didn't realize I was the one who had spent 30 years studying how to turn a single spark into a 5-alarm federal fire. I used the correct professional terminology when I spoke to Vanessa about the dinner. I spoke of fiduciary breach, constructive trusts, and tax evasion. She just nodded, patting my hand, thinking I was reciting old textbooks from a fading memory. She didn't realize I was reading her the charges. I checked my Casio. 1800. The guests would be arriving in an hour. Vanessa was upstairs putting on a dress that cost more than my first 2 years at the IRS. She was glowing, thinking she was minutes away from a $5 million payday. She thought she was optimizing the family's assets. She didn't realize, in the eyes of the law, she was just another target of interest. The trap was set. The SAR was filed. The UTMA trail was cold, hard evidence. She had more front than a department store window, I whispered to the kitchen. But the glass is about to shatter.
The dining room was set for 4. I had used the fine china, the stuff Sarah only brought out for anniversaries and Christmas. The smell of roasting lamb and rosemary filled the air, a domestic mask for the surgical strike that was about to occur. Vanessa arrived downstairs first, looking radiant in a silk dress the color of a champagne bottle. She was followed by Marcus Henderson, who wore a tailored suit and a look of smug professional empathy. My son, Arthur, was late, held up at work, a delay I had orchestrated with a well-placed emergency at his firm to ensure he wasn't caught in the immediate crossfire. "Ray, the house looks beautiful," Henderson said, his eyes already scanning the room for the paperwork. "It's a bittersweet night, I know, but it's the start of such a wonderful stress-free chapter for you." "Stress is a matter of perspective, Marcus," I said. I was sitting at the head of the table. I didn't have my cane. My back was straight, my eyes clear. Vanessa sat to my right, Henderson to my left. Between them sat a leather portfolio containing the final asset transfer documents. "Should we get the business out of the way before the lamb?" Vanessa asked, her voice light and musical. "I know you're tired, Ray. Let's just sign and then we can celebrate." I reached into my breast pocket. I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out a notice of levy, a bright yellow federal form that carries the weight of a thunderbolt. I laid it on top of the portfolio. The room went silent. The only sound was the crackle of the roast in the kitchen. "What is this, Ray?" Vanessa asked, her smile faltering. "Is this a joke?" "I don't joke about the Internal Revenue Code, Vanessa," I said. My voice was the cold, flat tone of a man who delivered death sentences to corporate empires. The front door opened. 3 people walked in. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, a federal prosecutor named David Miller, and the Director of Adult Protective Services. They didn't have wine. They had badges. Henderson stood up, his face turning the color of ash. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private residence." "Actually, Marcus," Sarah Jenkins said, stepping into the light of the chandelier, "as of 10 minutes ago, this is a federal crime scene. We've just executed a search warrant on the Golden Meadows business records and the personal accounts of a V Horizon Management." Vanessa's hand went to her throat. "Ray, what have you done?" "I performed an audit, Vanessa," I said. I stood up. I didn't look old. I looked like the lead auditor I had been for 30 years. I tracked the wash trades. I tracked the smurfing. I tracked the IP addresses from the guest room upstairs. And I tracked the $250,000 you stole from your own daughter to bribe this man. I looked at Henderson.
The UTMA liquidation, Marcus, that's a predicate act for a RICO charge. You're not a concierge, you're a co-conspirator in a scheme to defraud the elderly and embezzle federal trusts. David Miller, the prosecutor, stepped forward. Vanessa Thorne, we have the wire transfer trail to Grand Cayman. We have the forensic evidence of the burn mark on the counter being made with a butane torch, and we have the recorded phone calls between you and Mr. Henderson discussing the permanent institutionalization of your father-in-law. Vanessa's face contorted, the silk dress suddenly looking like a shroud. You were supposed to be confused. You were a fire hazard. You forgot your keys. I never forgot my keys, Vanessa. I just wanted to see where you'd put them, and you put them exactly where a thief would, in a place where you thought I wouldn't look, but I've spent my life looking in places thieves think are safe. Sarah Jenkins stepped towards Vanessa. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, you are being charged with wire fraud, embezzlement from a minor, and tax evasion. And Marcus, you're being charged with healthcare fraud and conspiracy. Henderson tried to bolt for the door, but the Adult Protective Services officer was already blocking it. Sit down, Marcus. You've done enough managing for one lifetime. Vanessa looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pure venomous hate. You ruined everything. We were going to be rich. Arthur and I deserved that money. Arthur had nothing to do with this, I said. He's a good man who married a predator. And Lily, she's a child who deserved a mother who didn't sell her education for a kickback. The handcuffs came out. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in years. It was the sound of the books finally balancing. As they led Vanessa out, she screamed. She called me a relic. She called me a ghost. I didn't say a word. I just looked at my Casio. 1915, exactly on schedule. Henderson went quietly, his tailored suit rumpled, his concierge mask shattered. The house was suddenly very quiet. Sarah Jenkins stayed behind for a moment. She looked at the lamb on the table. You didn't even have to raise your voice, Ray, she said. The numbers do the shouting for me, I said. What about Lily? The UTMA account has been frozen and will be restored through the asset forfeiture of Vanessa's shell company. I've already appointed a new, non-familial trustee. Sarah nodded. Take care of yourself, Ray. You're a hell of an auditor. I'm a grandfather, Sarah. That's the only job that matters now. She left, the blue and red lights of the federal vehicles fading into the rainy night. I walked into the kitchen. The lamb was perfect. The rosemary smelled like home. I looked at the burn on the counter. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and began to scrub. It would take a while, but eventually the mark would be gone, just like Vanessa. I checked my Casio, 2000 hours, time for Lily's bedtime story. I closed the folder. I made coffee. I stayed.
6 months have passed since the celebratory dinner. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet. Now it's a clean, honest silence. Vanessa is currently serving 48 months in a federal camp for women. She tried to claim diminished capacity during the trial, but Sarah Jenkins presented the logs of her midnight accounting sessions. The judge didn't find the Pilates and embezzlement lifestyle particularly sympathetic. She's currently restructuring the laundry schedule at the facility. Some people never change. Marcus Henderson lost his license and his concierge career. He's facing 10 years for his part in the RICO conspiracy. Golden Meadows was shut down and sold to a nonprofit that actually cares for the elderly. My son, Arthur, is healing. It was a hard audit for him, realizing the woman he loved was a financial predator. But we've grown closer. He's taking a lead role in the family business now, with a much keener eye for the small discrepancies. And Lily? Lily is thriving.
Her UTMA account is fully restored and locked behind a 3-factor authentication system that even the IRS would find impressive. She's back in her big girl school, and she's the lead in the school play. We still have our Sunday morning penny count. "Grandpa, look," she said this morning, holding up a shiny 2026 penny. "It's a new story." "It sure is, Lily," I said. I'm sitting at my mahogany desk. The burn mark is gone, replaced by a smooth white surface. I looked at the encrypted hard drive, then tucked it back into the hidden compartment. I don't think I'll need it again. I checked my Casio. 11 a.m. Time for my Earl Grey. I didn't lose my mind. I just found someone else's greed. And in the end, the only thing that matters is that the numbers finally tell the truth.